Good evening. Welcome to Discovering Buddhism. Alan here with our fourth class on the topic of wisdom of emptiness. Hope you're well, hope you're warm. So this is our last class on this topic. Next week we start on Tantra, Introduction to Tantra, which is the last topic or the last module subject in this cycle of discovering Buddhism. So that means we've done, usually takes about a year to get through the 13 topics, because we spend usually 4 weeks on each topic. So we'll finish off after Tantra, which I think will probably take us up to the end of the semester or the end of this term. And then we'll start all over again at this first topic, which I think is mind and its potential. So let's just start with our usual 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation using the breath. Help us calm ourselves, help us recover from the day's activities, and get in the right frame of mind to do some study and do some practice. Okay, get comfortable. Okay, now it's time for us to let go of the external busyness of the day and come into our inner world, what's happening in our body and our mind, and using our breath to calm the mind, take care of our mind, settle the mind. Just spending a moment to appreciate the great good fortune we have to be able to have met the Dharma, met the Buddhist teachings, and be able to spend some time studying them, putting them into practice, even though through the internet it's still a very effective way of practicing Buddhism and taking care of our mind. First of all, we just check our body, make sure we're comfortable on the chair or the floor, whatever we're sitting, lying on. Making sure his back is straight, shoulders relaxed, eyes can be closed or just gently open. Evenly balanced. And then when the body's comfortable, we just let go and just bring our attention to the breathing, the way the breath enters and leaves the body. It always has been, since we're born. Now is the time to notice it, to watch it. Nothing to change, nothing to judge, no right or wrong breath. Stepping aside and just watching the movement of the body with the breath. A simple task. It requires all our attention, all our mindfulness, all our alertness. watch the breath at the nostrils. We can watch the breath at the abdomen as it rises and falls. Or we can just watch the whole body moving with each breath, choosing the most comfortable place for our focus. Always, our mind is alert. Excuse me. Alert for distractions. This is called introspection, checking, watching the mind, watching the breath. When we notice that we've wandered, distracting thought, distracting sound, just relax, just a thought. Release, let go of that thought and come back to the breath. Relax, release, return to the breath. Okay, just relax, and what I'm going to do is just put the computer in front of where I'm facing, because there's nobody actually in the room tonight, and I can look straight at the people who are streaming. Good, so we can still see the Buddha, which is the main thing. So, hopefully you received the notes I sent out this morning, and I also sent out just the Discovering Buddhism question and answers for this module. I'm giving out the answers because we're doing most of our class online. So actually you'll notice that when you look at the questions, we've actually covered almost all of them in the previous weeks. And I don't think there's anything that needs to be repeated there. The last one, how are you going to realise emptiness? That's a big question, something to ponder. But the answer, notice the answer they give is that you'll need to do three things. Hearing, which is listening to teachings to realise emptiness. These are the three activities that are said to be involved in studying the Dharma. Listening to teachings or reading, that would be covered both reading and listening. Thinking, that's contemplating what's been heard or read. And then meditating, fixing the mind on points of the teachings and maybe analysing, debating, sort of looking what we do in analytical meditation, which is what we do at the end of each class. We do one analytical meditation. So hearing, thinking and meditating, they're the things that are involved in studying the Dharma, studying Buddhism. So it's a mixture of collecting information and practicing. So the practicing is involved the thinking and particularly the meditating. And this is what makes studying Buddhism different to studying a university degree, which is basically just looking at information and perhaps looking at different teachers' arguments, but there's no integrating into the mind stream, into the way we think, which is the meditating part. This is what makes studying Buddhism different to academic study. You'll see that if you read Lama Yeshe's teachings, he's always emphasizing how important it is to not just use intellectual part of our mind, but to use our to practice, to look at the teachings and analyze them and then meditate. Okay, that's the last one. And also the practice of accumulating merit there in the answer. That's emphasized, particularly when you're studying emptiness, to actually make headway. They say that accumulating merit is very important. So accumulating merit is doing things such as the 7-limb prayer, where we make offerings, we do confession, do purification of the mind, requesting a teacher for teachings, and then rejoicing, taking delight in the fact that other people have success, and when we see other people doing virtuous actions, taking delight and rejoicing in that. These practices are said to be very good. It's necessary to actually put the mind in a very positive state so that it can then be good ground to cultivate our understanding of emptiness. So it's a slow process. So let's now look at the questions for this week. There's only two because I've given you the DB questions. First one, in Chandrakirti's 7-point reasoning, which we looked at in last week's class, on selflessness, why can't we say a car is the collection of its parts? Okay, so if you remember last week, this 7-point reasoning uses the example of a car. I think they use the example of a chariot or something in the traditional teaching. And this is one used by Lam Tsongkhapa. It's part of the practice. So why when we're looking at how things exist, and we see something like an entity, a phenomenon like a car, and it looks, first glance, before we check and analyse, that it's 100% there. The car is 100% the car coming from its own side, existing from its own side, very solid, very real. But when we examine and check, it's very hard to actually find what the car is. And one of the arguments in the 7-point reasoning is to say, to look at the response that the car is simply a collection of its parts, the steering wheel, the tyres. Now, what's wrong with that? But you'll notice that, in the analysis, if we say the car is the same as the collection of parts, then it means that it's got to be exactly the same, the collection of parts. So the car is one thing, there's one car there, and the parts are multiple. There's the engine, there's hundreds of components of the car. So that's the first problem. There's only one car, but there's multiple bits, components to the car. So the parts are not one, the parts are multiple. So there's a problem there. You have one car, but multiple parts. So it's not exactly the same. Second thing is that we can apply this to the self, because the self can be also said, who is this person, me, who's meditating, studying, discovering Buddhism? And we looked at, remember the very first class, we looked at the 4-point reasoning, and one of those responses is the self is a collection of the parts of who I am. That's the body, and different aspects of our mind, different components. We can just call discrimination, etc. So these are called the 5 aggregates, the 5 collections. One's physical, body, and the other 4 are different aspects of our mind. Now, when we look closely, can we find the self in the body? And we've got the same problem when we look at where the car is in the components. The body is all these different bits and pieces, organs, and then at a deeper level it's molecules, and deeper level it's atoms, and at the quantum level it's the components of atoms and so on. So the more we look, the less we can find the self in those components, just as we can't find the car in those components. But still, they're related. We know that they're intertwined. The 5 aggregates are actually not separate from the self, but they're not the same. That's the first one. Next one is how phenomena and self exist, the reasoning of dependent arising. We had a look at that last week. Dependent arising is said the king of reasoning, and what it's basically the dependent arising or dependent nature of things is what's being proposed here, that everything, external phenomena and internal phenomena, our consciousness, ourself as well, depend on other factors. So we can say they're dependent on parts. That's the argument we just looked at with Chandrakirti in the car. We can say they're dependent on causes and conditions. So this is the idea of a tree being dependent on the seed being dependent on the water, the nutrients, the sunlight, and so on. So these different causes and conditions that need to come together to produce a tree from the seed. And of course the seed and even the water and all those components are all dependent on other factors and other parts, other causes and conditions. So parts, causes and conditions, and what's the other factor? If you were here, you could say, so the other one is the labeling. So this is the designation. So that's the mind that puts a label on top of what it is that we're aware of, what we're looking at. where we've got the car with all the components, and on top of that, when we see the car with components arranged in a certain way, we designate that the label is car. Similarly, when we've got the 5 aggregates, the body and mental factors, and they're all present, that base, that's called the base, then we put the label on top of that, which is the self. That's me, that's I, that's Alan, that's Joe Blow, that's whoever we're talking about. So there's the base, the label, and the third thing that's going on is the mind. The mind's actually putting the label on, the labeling mind. So those 3 components of dependent arising, the labeling mind, the designation, the object, base, this is the base, the label that we put on top, and the mind which is doing the labeling. I guess the mind comes before the label. Maybe we should say the base, the mind, and then the mind labeling. All right, so that's just refreshing what we covered last week. And so the next, really what I've done for this last class is just look at some of the readings in the DB handouts that you all received, and particularly I'm looking at Lama Yeshe's article, extract from his teaching called Non-Duality, page 13 of the readings. This one is very, for me, quite readable, quite easy to digest, and it's also very deep, quite very effectively the concept of relative and ultimate truth. So that's in that article by Lama Yeshe, page 13 of the readings. Just I'll summarise some parts of that, or most of it actually. But if you've got time, it's good to actually go back and read the actual extract, if you haven't already. So most of what I've got there on the first page of the notes from Lama Yeshe's article is actually quotes from Lama Yeshe. So they're actually his words, because I can't improve on Lama Yeshe's words, even though sometimes they're not perfectly. He uses words in a very poetic way sometimes, and so this somehow is what he's doing is trying to get behind our reasoning mind, our very rational mind, to try, because understanding emptiness requires something beyond the intellect. The intellect helps, and then at a certain point we need to let go of the reasoning mind, rational mind, and just experience. So Mahamudra, that word Mahamudra, which is translated as the Great Seal, it's the seal of seeing things as non-dual. So it's, just quite what Lama Yeshe said. Now, Mahamudra itself is non-duality. It's the absolute true nature of all universal phenomena, and whether they be internal or external. So everything we experience, that's all the external world that we see, hear, touch, feel, and also our internal world, our mental experiences, our consciousness, it's by nature non-dual. They're beyond duality and beyond our false discriminations. So he says that existing energy is born with non-duality. Every existing energy is born with non-duality and finally disappears into the nature of non-duality. By contrast, so this experience of non-duality can occur if we meditate, and if we've got the merit, of course, and follow the practices. And in this article, Lama Yeshe is just giving the introduction to non-duality. So the state of being, the mind being in a state of non-duality is called Mahamudra. And so he's written a book on that. So if you want, in the reading list is a book called Mahamudra by Lama Yeshe. And the other place to find more detailed explanation of Mahamudra is the last article in the reading, which is called Mahamudra. So that's quite a long article. It's about maybe 20 or 30 pages. And what it is, Lama Yeshe is he's giving teachings to a group of students in some country, I'm not sure where, maybe in Europe, I think, a long time, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And he's giving them directed meditation. So he talks a little bit objectively, and then he's actually guiding them through how to use the mind, particularly using single point of concentration, shamatha, which is the sort of concentration we do in our breathing meditation, to rest the mind on how the self exists, how the mind exists, the mind. So it's mind looking at mind. So these words and explanations of biology are an attempt to actually describe the experience of non-duality. Experience is a meditative state. Mahamudra. So then Lama Yeshe talks a bit about the Buddhist schools of philosophy, and all the readings don't spend a lot of time looking at the academic. And one's called Madhyamaka, sometimes called Madhyamika, which is the middle way school. And within the Madhyamaka school, middle way school, there are two sub-schools. One's called Svatantrika Madhyamika, very hard to pronounce, and the other one's Prasangika Madhyamaka, consequence. Easier term, one that Lama Yeshe used, is the consequentialist school. Consequentialist school. I would actually just use those words. So the mind-only school and the consequentialist school is what we're looking at. Now, the last one, Madhyamaka, Prasangika Madhyamaka, consequentialist, is the highest school in Buddhist philosophy, and that's the one that we're striving to comprehend, understand, and achieve. To get there, Lama Tsongkhapa and other teachers say we need to actually understand the Chittamatra school, mind-only school. So what the mind-only school is saying, just read what Lama Yeshe says, it contends that all objects of the sense world, that's everything we see, touch, feel, the sense world is objects out there, are simply manifestations of mental energy and do not exist externally at all. So this is the mind, which they say does exist, and they do say that the mind-only school actually say that the mind has to exist in some way from its own side. They don't accept that the mind can be empty of true existence. They require to have some sort of something to hold on to. So the mind exists, but everything that sees out there is just a manifestation of mind. That is mental energy, mind energy. So the next school is the consequentialist school, and they say, well, that's very useful to have an understanding of mind only, but in fact, the mind itself doesn't have any inherent existence also, as well as the outside phenomena not having any inherent existence. The mind itself is dependent on cause conditions. And I'll quote, existence of all things, this is the consequentialist, depends on recognition of an imputing consciousness, that's the mind, and to say there is nothing other than the mind is an error. So they say that the mind and the Chittamatrans are actually in error. But so both schools agree that the dualistic mind, which puts things in a dualistic way, where there's the observer and the observed, there's me here and there's the material world out there. They say that's a deceptive way of looking. Things don't actually exist like that. But when we get further down into what the mind is, that's where they differ. The consequences agree that if we can understand the mind-only school, consequences is the highest school, remember, we're qualified to practice the profound methods of Tantra Yoga and reach high levels of understanding. So it's like a platform. It's like a stepping stone, understanding the mind-only school. And so when we do Tantra, the next subject, Tantra, we'll have a look at how that understanding of mind-only can help the practice of Tantra. Now, here's I think I mentioned this example last week briefly, the example that Lama Yeshe uses of Coca-Cola and bubbles, like a fizzy drink. Bubbles doesn't have to be Coca-Cola. So if we look at a glass of fizzy drink, we've got the liquid and we've got the bubbles, and the bubbles you can see come and go. Quite fascinating to watch how the bubbles seem to come out of the liquid and then they dissolve and go back into it. It's quite a dynamic thing to watch, a glass of fizzy lemonade or whatever. And so Lama Yeshe says that applying this to the different philosophical schools, the mind only says that the 6 things that we see with the 6 senses, taste, colour, shape, objects, these are like the bubbles arising from the liquid, which is the mind. So the mind is there, the bubbles are just coming and going. So there's no substantial substance to these phenomena. That's called relative phenomena, things that we see out there, the external world. But mind itself has a true inherent existence. But the consequences say that not only do the bubbles have no inherent existence, they're just dissolving and arising and dissolving back into mind, arising from the mind, dissolving back into the mind. But even the mind itself lacks concrete, independent existence. And there's not the slightest trace of self-existence to the mind. Not the slightest trace. There's not even a little bit of reality there. This is what distinguishes the Prasangita Madhyamika school from mind-only school. And it's very subtle. I can say how other teachers explain it, but I haven't yet experienced it. That's all. But the mind-only school for me, and I think for probably people in just beginning their study of wisdom, breathing, of emptiness, is helpful. It sort of gives some security to think that the mind must have some sort of existence, and from that, the coming and going of colours, shapes, phenomena, you can accept that they are subject to cause and conditions and empty of inherent existence, so it's easier. But the consequences say, both conventional and ultimate levels, nothing has objective reality from its own side. So another way of expressing it, which Lama Yeshe then moves on to, is to look at relative and ultimate truth. Excuse me, just have a sip. So non-duality and duality, really looking at the observer from the observer's point, from the mind's point of view. So this part of the discussion is really looking at how phenomena exist. The relative appearance senses, they're all the 5 senses, and the 6th is the consciousness, the Buddhist philosophy, and they appear to exist independently. So this is conventional existence. And when we're looking at the appearance of the physical world, we use subject-object. I'm here, and my mind is, I'm in here with the body and the five aggregates, and that chair's out there. So this is the dualistic aspect of it, subject of it. It's often described as the this, that way of thinking. This is here, that's there, that person is like that, he's a good person, that person's a bad person, that person's just like that, and just like this. And so we make up these labels and we hold on to them as being completely true. But in absolute, in another, that's the relative appearance, and then this other aspect, which exists at the same time, is that they all have this absolute non-dualistic nature. They're coming from the idea of non-duality. I keep going back to the fizzy drink example, the absolute nature of those bubbles, they're coming out of the nature of the drink, which is to be non-dualistic. Here's another good example that I'm usually uses. Which is more pervasive, the population of Australia or the population of Sydney? Pervasive, what does that mean? Population of Australia, population of Sydney. So just think about discussions of the population of Australia is 25,000 and the population of Sydney is whatever it is, 25 million, sorry. Population of Sydney is 5 million. So that's one aspect of the population, is how many there are. But then you can think in terms of the components of the population of Australia. They're all individuals, they're people, bodies and mind. So the population of Australia includes the population of Sydney. So the population of Australia is somehow, Sydney is somehow part of the population of Australia. So Sydney pervades the population of Australia. It's within it. Now, the population of Sydney does not pervade the population of Australia. You can't say that, because that's just one part of it. So similarly, if we try to apply this to this analysis of how things exist, non-duality is like the population of Australia. It's the characteristic. It's all, so all the Australianness of Sydney people is the equivalent in this example of the non-duality. So all Australian Sydney people are part of the population of Australia. So non-duality is part of all things that appear out of non-duality. All relative phenomena are embraced by non-duality, is the way Laniushi puts it, because they arise within, and there's a misprint there, the space of non-duality. Just if you've got your piece of paper, or you could just take up, it should read, all relative phenomena are embraced by non-duality because they arise within the space of non-duality. All relative phenomena demonstrate non-duality. This is just my own sort of, I've recently listened to Robert Thurman talking about emptiness, he's a great scholar and a great ex-monk, one of the very senior teacher of Mahayana Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. So he points out how physics, he's also a scientist, matter, which looks to be using physics to penetrate what matter is, E equals mc squared. That's the Einsteinian formula to explain what energy is and matter is. So energy equals matter times a certain constant number. So if you, even at the physical level, the material level, there's no sort of 100% matter there. Matter is energy, and energy is matter. So that's what that E equals m squared Einsteinian formula tells us, that matter is energy, and energy is matter. Another one is light. Light is a combination of both waves and particles. It's also invisible, and it will behave sometimes like a particle and sometimes like wave. There's no way of pinpointing exactly what light is, except we can only see light when it actually rests on some object. Otherwise it's there, but if light's just passing through space, can't see it. And sometimes it behaves like a particle and sometimes like a wave. So all this to me, it's sort of help, although I'm not a scientist, it helps to sort of break down the solidity of what seems to be a very concrete external world. Even physics says that there is no, that a study of some of those aspects of physics helps to break down that concreteness. So just looking at this, put together a few thoughts from previous teachers who've taught this subject of Buddhism, of wisdom of emptiness, and Renata Ogilvie, very learned teacher. Some of her notes are quite useful to. So these are thoughts from her study of the subject on how we can reflect thoughts on how to think about emptiness in daily life. Wai Chong is our resident lay teacher here at VI and also very learned. Has also done the master's program and has taught DB for many years. So I'll just pick a few of these points on Renata's thoughts, page 3. Contemplate the nature of objects changing as your interest in them increases and decreases. So this is something we've all experienced, particularly if we buy something brand new, beautiful new jumper or shirt or dress, pair of shoes we love, and how this incredible interest and like when we first get them. But as time goes on and they lose their luster, is it the shoes that lose their luster, or is it our mind, or both? So our interest decreases. And we think perhaps there might be another pair of shoes that are actually more interesting than that. And even though they seem to be the same, I'm a bit sick of them. So these are just looking at how the mind can reinterpret reality, even though reality could be either unchanged or hardly changed. Same with relationships. If we sort of fall in love with someone who seems to be the perfect person, that may last, it may be lifelong love, but we could be out of love very soon. And has the person changed? Has our knowledge of the person changed? Or has the mind changed? So this moving feast of external worlds, and how our mind's eye, quite a useful phrase, the mind's eye, our way of looking at things can reinterpret reality. We buy this beautiful townhouse that we've saved out all our life for, and it seems to be exactly perfect on the day we buy it, and probably for a few months or years after we move in, but then slowly there are things that we don't like, noisy neighbours, or it's actually not that good, not as good as we thought. We start to see the faults. The house has not changed. The house is still changing in the mind. But this is helping to understand that the way we think things is not 100% based on external reality. Another one, notice how you appear to your own mind and how others appear by contrast. I find this I read that several times, and I thought that's really interesting. How you appear to your own mind. Now this is, when we did the very first meditation in the first class, we looked at how the I appears to our mind. Remember that? It's actually called the 4-point analysis, where we just look, this person sitting here in meditation, and can we actually get a sense of a self, me, sitting here? What does it mean? Sometimes it's very elusive. We know we're sitting here, but what does it mean? When we look deeper, it's not so simple. We know there's a body, so we look at the body, but it's not just the body, there's also the mind. And so how you appear to your own mind, how the self appears to your own mind, and how others appear by contrast. So maybe we tend to think of ourselves as in the centre of the universe. That's another thing to notice. And the other people are just like players. We're the star of the movie, and then there are these other bit part players who are other people. But basically, we're in the centre of our thoughts and action. So this is what they're doing. This is just looking at how we think of ourselves and others. There's lot of aspects involved in that. How phenomena arising depends on cause and conditions, such as sounds, beauty, food, headaches, cars, and so on, and how this contradicts how we usually perceive phenomena. Because our usual, when we're walking through the supermarket, unless we're sort of remembering our teachings in Emptiness or the Buddhist studies, our DB study, it seems that everything is there on the shelf without cause and conditions. They just somehow appear there. We don't think about all the people who grew the food and how the sunlight created the plant, made the plant grow, the water, the nutrients. And we've got a headache. This is a non-physical thing. It seems to be 100% there, but where does it come from, the pain? Pain is a very interesting thing to look at. You can't have a gram of pain or an ounce of depression. So these are non-physical, and they're dependent on course conditions. Depending on the headache could have come from noise, it's some external cause, but also the mind is involved. Looking back, these images and so on. When it's quiet, the clouds clear, and this sensual luminosity, it's called, mind is luminous and clear and luminous. So, or clear and able to perceive. Basically, the definition of mind in Buddhist philosophy or studies, Buddhist thinking, is that the mind is like, it's non-physical, and just like the sky without the clouds, it's just vast. And it's got the second part, it's non-physical, invisible, but it also has the power to apprehend. That means it's like a mirror, things that pass in front of it. Or another one I like to think of is the radar dish. It's pointing up to outer space, which is ready to receive whatever comes into its orbit. The mind is like that, ready. It's aware. That's the idea of awareness. It can apprehend with it. So this is another one. All these sort of contemplations on how the mind exists helps us to create and move towards an understanding of emptiness, how all phenomena exist and how we exist. Also, Renata suggests if we're sort of stuck in traffic, waiting in a queue, driving long distances, or even lying on the beach, relaxing, acquaint yourselves more with the principle of emptiness of all phenomena. We can look at, if we're on the beach, looking at the waves, the ocean, the causes of the ocean, causes and conditions, the components, the parts, the soul. We can look at things like people on the beach. People are actually human beings like us, how we perceive them, how we perceive them, and how we perceive ourselves. every subject causes condition, and we label. Notice the mind labeling. Oh, the ocean. Oh, that's a fish. You can see that swimming. So these just everyday examples of how mind can be tuned in to go beyond first impressions, which is what we're doing with studying emptiness, how we're trying to go beyond the appearance, which we're told is deceptive. Our unenlightened mind takes these appearances as true. But now that we've got contact and familiarity with some of the Buddhist teachings of emptiness, we can go deeper. So similarly, Wat Chong suggests that if we've just had a big emotional outbreak, so we've got really angry, experiencing great attachment for things or people, we look back after that sort of explosion of emotions that occurred and look at what happened, reflect on the details. So this is another one we do in meditation, how attachment arises, how anger arises, and what's actually happening. And so this can help cause what are the cause conditions and so on, or we might sort of use our understanding to analyze an angry person, to actually see what's going on there with that person. And he also says, interestingly, this is more conceptual. In law, we've got this thing called a company. It's a very interesting concept in law. And the company is it's got what we call corporate personalities. It doesn't have a body, but it has, it's called an entity. It can enter contracts, can hold property, can own houses, can own cars and so on. A company can do everything a human being can do, but it never dies. And it has no body. So if you just accept that, that's sort of the legal definition. But if you look beyond that and from view of emptiness, company is actually just a human construction. So somebody long ago has thought up that this, human beings running businesses shouldn't have to be liable to all their debts. Maybe the company could act as a shield to protect people, encourage people to take risks and so on. So they created, people operate their business from a company to protect their own assets. And so this company is seen in law, it's seen as a person. Very strange, quite a hard thing to grasp. But when you look closely, it's actually a mental construct. It doesn't have any physical existence. It's something that is a construct. And to create it, all you have to do is fill in a form and lodge it, pays the money and lodge it, and you go on a register. And the government keeps that and says, oh no, you're a company. But you're not a company, but the company exists, and maybe you're the director. So the company exists separately from you as a concept. And it can function. So just like in there's emptiness teachings that the tree, the headache, the car are all lacking independent self-existence, but they function. They can still function. This is quite a hard thing to grasp. They can still operate. The tree can grow, subject to cause conditions. It doesn't make it less empty. So I think it's sort of getting on to 8. I think that's enough talk. Finish off these. The last thing Wat Chong mentioned is space. Space is quite useful. There's some good meditations where they say just lie on the top of a hill with your eyes open on with a sky, clear view of the sky, particularly if it's an empty blue sky, and just relax the mind and allow the mind to merge with that space. Now, this is not emptiness, but it can help create this first step where the mind is in a relaxed feeling, open feeling, flexible, creative, uncluttered. So in that state, then we can perhaps do some meditations on emptiness, different types of meditation on emptiness, and with the merging of our self, our idea of self, with that vast space. There are some practices like that. So the analysis, the meditation for tonight I've chosen is the analysis of the six senses. So this analysis is quite a useful one. It's used in Mahayana Buddhism and also in Theravada Buddhism. And we're looking at these components that in Tibetan or in, I guess, Buddhist, not just Tibetan, but all Buddhist schools, different Buddhist tradition, Mahayana, Theravada, the elements of the earth are different from what modern science says the elements of the earth. In modern science, we say oxygen, carbon, there are all these, I've forgotten how many, I used to know when I was at school how many elements there were, but there are many dozens of elements, maybe even hundreds, dozens. But the Buddhist analysis say that there are actually 6 elements. And in this meditation, we actually look at these 6 elements as external elements, and then we think that these elements are also part of our body. And the elements are fire, heat, energy, air is movement, air or winds, same thing in this analysis, space, distance between things, and that's it. So earth, water, fire, air, space. And there's actually another one sometimes put in, which is consciousness, which is non-physical. Otherwise, so in this particular meditation, we'll just do those first 5, earth, water, fire, air, space. Sometimes the conscious one is put in, but to make it a little bit shorter, we'll just do those 5 elements. So what we do, first of all, I'll read you what Nagarjuna says about the 6 elements, because this is like poetry, but it goes beyond our intellect. A person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, and not all of them. What person is there other than these? So he's not each one of them, and he's not all of them, but there's no person that's other than these. The person is still part of those 6 elements. So what we're looking, this has helped to loosen, looking for if there's anything that we can call our us, that I exclusively, say in the earth element. We look at the earth element out there, it covers the trees, the mountains, the roads, the buildings, the city. And then we look at the earth element in our body, which is our solid parts, it's our bones, our organs, the weight, body, teeth, nails, skin, muscles, and so on, food we ingest. And then we think the connection between the two. There is a connection. We eat food, that's the main connection with the earth element, outer world, and integrated into our inner component, inner world. We take parts of the earth, outer, external earth element, put them in the inner, our inner world. And there's this connection. Then we ask the question, okay, I'm part of the external earth element, but there's anything in me, that I can say, oh, that I own that part of the earth element, and that's me. Okay? So we ask that for each of the 5 elements, 5 physical elements, and the intention is to have a sense of letting go, that there's nothing that I can hold on to it, even though I think I exist here. This is an instinctive grasping of a real self here somewhere. But when we look at the sixth element, the five elements or sixth element, they exist in and out of our mind and body, our five aggregate. But there's nothing we can hold and say, oh, this is definitely me. Okay, so that's really the practice. So get comfortable and we'll start. Okay, we begin with just bringing our attention inwards, just a few breaths, noticing the breath, calming the mind by using the breath, calm the mind, moving to the breath in the body. So we begin our meditation on analysing the six elements: earth, water, fire, air, wind, space, consciousness. Beginning with the earth element. The earth element is by nature solid, as our body, now in a world. There's also the earth element externally, so this covers the room we're in, the walls, the cushions, the physical objects, hills, the roads, continents, the planet Earth. We just get a sense of that vastness of the earth, external earth element. Our body is part of the earth element. Now, what's the connection between the external and the internal earth element? Connected mainly through the food we eat. We take in food, nutrients, from the time we were conceived. We took in our mother's milk. And now we continue to consume food every day. Food that is grown in the earth. The food's taken in and it's burnt, it's been digested, converted into energy, and nutrients are extracted. We excrete the unwanted, the waste of the earth element back into the earth. We shed our skin cells as they die, cut our hair, cut our nails, they're back together. And then at the time of death, when we leave the body returns to the earth. So this earth element, external, internal, is there anything that is 100% me? That we own? Nothing that we can hold on to as mine, as the earth element comes and goes, rises, and then disintegrates. Second element is the water element. It's the characteristics of cohesion, flowing, wetness, liquidity, internally, what makes up our body fluids, saliva, blood, sweat, mucus, urine, the lymph, urine, the lymph, liquids, oil. The body is more than 90% liquid, water. The water element is manifested in the external world as rain, rivers, oceans, clouds, snow, lake. The fire element, heat, has the characteristic of energy, warmth. The inner fire element is that of body heat. Internal heat of the body as it digests and burns up the food. External, this metabolism gives the body energy, and also there's the electric currents in the nervous system of the body coming from fire. The nervous system of the body coming from fire. Outer aspects of the environment, ultimately the sun, or energy comes ultimately from the sun. Also from volcanoes, from burning fossil fuels. You can get close to the fire and feel the fire element reacting with the body, warming the body. Connection between the outer and air or wind element is a characteristic of expansion. The air that flows in and out of our nostrils with each breath, the air in our lungs, the air is dissolved in the blood, oxygen turned into carbon dioxide. Reflect on the outer air element, the winds, breezes around my body. The moment we're born, taking in air and breathing out air, the breath. Every living being using the air element the same way. Anything in the air element that is exclusively mine. Is there a part of myself in the air element? Finally, the space element. Space includes in our body the chest cavity, nasal cavity, lungs, space in the stomach, space between the cells, space between the atoms that make up the cells, space between the subatomic particles. The outer space element extends beyond our house, our planet, space between objects, space between planets and solar systems. Where does the space, my body and the external space begin? Is our skin a true boundary, inside and outside? Our skin is full of pores, constantly connecting with the outside world. So if we contemplate these 5 or 6 elements, the actual self is lost. Just reading Nagarjuna's stanza again, a person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, and not all of them. What person is there other than these? So finally, we'll just dedicate any positive imprints on our minds, any merit from this meditation, from tonight's class, from all our positive actions done in the past. These 2 wings of the bird that will take us to enlightenment. May we become enlightened beings so that we can lead other beings to the state of enlightenment. Dedicating to that. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for being there. Just a reminder, next week, if you are thinking of coming to the centre, there's no live class at the centre there. They're using this room for another purpose next week. So next week, just an online class. So don't leave your house. I'll be teaching from my place. So just online only next week. So have a good night and a good week. Stay well, and hope to see you next week. Thank you. Next time.